Most of us really love the look of ferns, but have trouble keeping them in our homes. So I wanted to highlight a number of varieties that I think are super easy to care for in the home. All right, so I have a selection of ferns here that I think are a little bit more resilient than, say, a maidenhair fern, which I know a lot of us actually have trouble taking care of. Maidenhair ferns are a bit specific in their needs, meaning that they need to be moist at all times. It is one of those ferns that will die back, but if you cut it, it will often grow again. And that is pretty indicative to a lot of the ferns that I have here, but they just seem to be a little less temperamental when it comes to the watering regime indoors. So the first one that I would like to highlight is the Aspleniums. This one is a type of cultivar of Asplenium nidus, and this is a bird's nest fern. So you can see that it's called a bird's nest fern for the reason that it has this kind of nest-like shape. And I have another interesting cultivar that I had picked up called Asplenium kenzoi. And these two have been extremely resilient. I actually have some more Aspleniums as well. And these are just really extremely resilient. They don't need to be watered at all times. They do grow a little bit more as epiphytes, which means they're growing on other trees or plants. And the reason why they have this bird's nest shape is it's cup shaped. So when the rain falls down, some of the nutrients get trapped in and around the rootstock of this plant. So that is a plant that doesn't necessarily need to be watered at all time. You also notice that it has a little bit of a thicker leaf. So when we think of the maidenhair fern, and I'm going to be picking on the maidenhair fern a lot in this episode, we think of those really thin, feathery leaves. So that is a plant that likes to be a little bit more moist or in a little bit more higher humidity. The next ones on my list are rabbit's foot ferns. Now these are Davallia griffithianas. This one's actually another type of Davallia. I'm not sure what species this is. It has a little bit more of a feathery frond structure. And these plants do appreciate being in a little bit more humidity, but they don't always need it. And I have picked these out as one of the more resilient ferns, largely because I've had this growing for a little over 4, almost 5 years now. And it's a little sparse, but it's been suffering from scale for the longest time. So I actually could see some of the scale on here. I have to clean it off. But it is a plant that keeps on putting out green. And again, that is the reason why I'm highlighting this, because some plants, they get a pest or a disease and they just perish right away. This plant just seems to keep on chugging. And it's a plant, like I said, that would appreciate a little bit more humidity, but doesn't always need it. And also these little kind of rhizomes, or these little stalks, these little root stalks, are what you could use to propagate it. So if you see very closely on these root stalks, you see that they have these little ferns coming out of it. And you just take one of those and you put that on some soil and it'll just start to grow. Again, just this amount of resiliency that this plant has, I think is pretty remarkable. The next one on my list is my Phlebodium aureum. And I may have mentioned this in 365 Days of Plants, where I'm highlighting one plant a day, but this is one that I actually talked about that had gotten eaten by a house mouse. So you could actually see the little nibbles just around the edge of this leaf, and I actually had to cut off 2 more leaves that got completely eaten up. But this I left on just to show you, because I think it's very interesting that basically almost all the leaves have been eaten off of this plant. And I have this one little rootstock or rhizome that's here, very fuzzy, similar to the rabbit's foot ferns, the Davallia that I just showed you. And a bunch of other leaves just started to come out from there, some new fresh leaves. So again, just goes to show you how resilient these plants are. And when we kind of look at the history of plants, those ferns were one of the earlier plants on this planet. So they don't produce by seed, they produce by spore. So some would say that they are kind of like a prototype plant. They weren't the first plants on the planet, but they were one of the earlier ones. And they probably have been developing for a much longer time. And they have developed some sets of resiliency. And I think part of these rhizomes, the rootstocks, the ability to be able to regenerate very easily, I think is some of those adaptations that they've had over the many millennia and millions of years that they've been developing. All right, the next one I'm going to show you is a really unusual one, and it's a plant that I have moved around my house consistently. So it's never been like one place for too long of a time, and it doesn't even look like a fern. This is an Elaphoglossum. This particular variety is Elaphoglossum metallicum, and I love this plant. It's not really a looker in the sense that it's not like this really full plant, so it's part of the reason why I haven't been able to really find a place for it. But the other thing is that it's intensely resilient. So these are plants that often grow as epiphytes. I've seen these in the wild, so I've seen Elaphoglossums growing in the wild, like on the thinnest and the barest wood. And it's hard to maybe see here, but this has this metallic sheen, and they grow in the understories of forests. So it actually has this kind of blue metallic sheen. It has a very thick cardboardy leaf. So if you think of the maidenhair fern, very thin feathery leaf, this one feels like cardboard. I mean, it's pretty resilient. I have had and moved this into some of the darker corners of my room, and it just chugs along beautifully. The slowest grower, and when you see them in the wild, they're not growing in these large clumps or anything. Like I said, they're just kind of like in these little pockets of wood. So this probably won't be a full plant, but it's one that is extremely resilient and doesn't need a tremendous amount of humidity. And I'm sure if you give that, it will love it, but it doesn't need it in your home. All right, the penultimate one that I'm going to show you is one that we probably all know. It's the staghorn fern, the Platycerium bifurcatum. And this is a plant that I have mounted on sphagnum. You could often get it like this. Sometimes you'll get them in kind of a potting medium. I don't really recommend those, but I like the ones that are mounted. Plus, you don't have to have it like on a horizontal surface, and you could have it on a vertical surface, which means more space for plants. And this one, you just have to kind of think about watering it very differently. So sphagnum, even though it maintains moisture, it also loses moisture as well. So I find that I have to water this, depending on the season and how much light is coming in, sometimes every third or fourth day. And because otherwise these will start to droop and it will turn pretty brown. The shield will start to turn brown and some of the leaves will start to fall off if you're not watering it as regularly, especially if it's mounted on sphagnum. So this one, I highly recommend it. You could also go very wrong with these. And I have, like my first one, I ended up not surviving because I just kind of mistreated it for too long. And so you just have to recognize that you have to get it on a different schedule and a different watering schedule than probably some of your other plants. All right, the last plant that I'm going to highlight, I also highlighted on 365 Days of Plants, and this is Drynaria. And this again is another type of epiphytic fern, and you'll see that it has two different types of leaves. You'll have these green leaves up top and these brown leaves below. And again, this acts very much similar to the Asplenium that I had mentioned before, where it has serve as these little cups in order to be able to get some of the nutrients that are coming through the leaves and through raindrops. So this is a plant, again, that would prefer to be in a little bit more epiphytic mix. I have heard from people that this will go dormant. I have never had my Drynaria go dormant on me, no matter what the season, and I'm not quite sure why. You can see that there are some browning leaves right here. It could just be that I'm not watering it as thoroughly around. You could see it's in a pretty tight pot, and it has this kind of like rhizomatous, almost caudiciform-like base to it. And sometimes if I'm not getting the water all the way around, one of these fronds may start to dry out. So that is something that I would recommend, that if you want to have it in a little bit of a larger pot than I do, or you just want to be more mindful when you're watering all the way around to make sure that all of those fronds are getting water. But I would say that, I would have loved to highlight the maidenhair fern in here, but like I said, that is one that people have a lot of challenge with, and it's largely because you have to get it on a regular watering schedule all the time. But I just have to say that these ferns I would highly recommend because, as I'd mentioned, they're all very resilient and very beautiful to have in your home.
Do you
have recommendations of easy to care for ferns? Share with others in the comments below. And let's help make botanical awareness grow. Click the subscribe button to help others find videos like this. And if you want to deepen your knowledge of plant care, then check out some of my other resources, including my book, How to Make a Plant Love You, the 125 Houseplant Care Sheet and Houseplant Care Tracker, and the Houseplant Masterclass, which is the first audiovisual course on houseplant care, cultivation, and more at houseplantmasterclass.com.